Hello, everybody, and thank you all for joining us again here today on Hastings County for another TTRPG Talk. This video series takes a look at tabletop role-playing games and related materials, discusses all the various things to do with them, and today what we're going to be doing is, well, I mean, in some ways this, I guess, is sort of a celebration of, I guess, 3 years. 3 years ago this week, I posted my first TTRPG related video onto YouTube. Channels existed long before that, of course. But yeah, this the first video I had posted was related to one of my own games. And yeah, so what we're going to be doing is today we're going to be doing a sort of quick little sort of Ask Me Anything video. So I posted onto mostly Bluesky. But shared around in a couple other places, asking if people wanted to, well, ask me questions as part of that. And then also, I figured I would also go ahead and do some bookbinding work in the process, just to make this a bit more informal, show you a bit more of the process of how this works. Also, taking two things I like to do and putting them together. Even more so because, of course, the materials I'm going to be binding are going to be some TTRPGs that I've printed that I've been meaning to work on for a while. I've run really far behind on some of the projects I've been meaning to work on. So yeah, we'll be starting to stitch one of those today and doing a little work on this one right here that you see here. Yeah, so let's go ahead and hop into that and take a look at the first question. And for the first question, I'm actually not going to be answering a thing that somebody had posted into my sort of like Ask Me Anything thread that I started on Bluesky, but rather a question that was recently posted and is a comment on one of my earlier videos, one of my earlier system reference document videos. And that question was, will you cover the Gumshoe SRD? I'd like to. For those of you who aren't aware, Gumshoe is basically a system that's really built around mysteries and that kind of stuff. And at least that's my relatively primitive understanding of it at this stage. There's one slight problem though with that, and that's because I'm holding the Gumshoe SRD. So yeah, as you can probably tell, it is a very, very, very long document. Now, obviously, the key section of the rules is not this whole thing, but this whole thing is the SRD. It's over 300 pages. Um, it's going to take me a little while to kind of read through this, digest it, really truly understand it, and be able to, I feel, really explain it to the same sort of level that I do some of my other system reference document videos. So yeah, this is going to take some time. Um, so yeah, one thing that I guess I'll go ahead and do real quick before I move on to the next question is actually go on to the next process of this book. As you can see here, this text block has already been bound. It's already all sewn up and everything. All of these black little lines you see here are the threads that are kind of holding everything together. And of course, we have these little pieces of fabric. This is ribbon or tape. Usually the bookbinding tape is very similar to like bias tape or something else you would use if you're familiar with like quilting and cloth making. That potentially might use materials like that to kind of like, put around the edges of stuff. This is somewhat similar in that it's a fabric tape that you then will glue down in order to basically add extra rigidity to the spine, help hold the book together a bit more than just the threads can provide. The threads don't actually go through the tape, but it does help with the actual like holding things together because of the fact that these fabric pieces are glued to the inside of the this is the end sheet, right? So it's glued to the outside of the end sheet on both sides, and then also, of course, the cover, the hardback cover actually goes around the outside here and here like this. So yeah, I'm gonna real quick go ahead and glue this up, and we'll see how much of this process ends up staying in the video. we'll need to see, because unfortunately, I'm going to need to concentrate a little bit, so I can't really talk and do this at the same time. So just to do this normally, I just use like a regular brush. This is a type of PVA glue that's sort of like acid free. So this is not your standard. Yes, it looks like standard white glue, but it's not your, your schoolhouse Elmer's glue. This is a slightly different formulation to give it to put a lot less acid in it, so it's less damaging long term to the paper and the fabric. So it'll last a bit longer than what you would normally have if you were to put it onto put like standard school glue or some sort of like tacky fabric glue or even some types of like Mod Podge and stuff like that. Those are usually not necessarily acid-free uh, formulations. This is more of like an archival type of glue. Anywho, uh, so yeah, I basically normally whenever I do this, I start off by just kind of just trying to saturate the fabric, get it all the way through. It does make it a little messier, but obviously, if we want it to really, really stick to the paper, we're going to need to do that. And then I'll just go ahead and finish pasting this one on before I start getting stuff on the other one. And of course, we are going to have glue kind of try to come out underneath the fabric, but that's okay. And of course, it's going to come through the fabric a little bit, and that's okay too. And then once I'm done gluing this on, I'm going to have to take it off screen, so I'll definitely cut that part out, but I'm going to put it down and weigh it so that the page is open like this and put the weight right here using like a board and then a weight on top of the board to really make sure that I kind of press it down and make sure that this doesn't go all wibbly wobbly on me as a result of doing this. And we're back. So for this next one, we have a question from Aaron Voigt and the fellow TTRPG YouTuber, and their question was, "What is your ambitious but possible idea for a creative project that you would like to do?" One of the more ambitious ones that I could do, and I had actually originally intended on doing this project this year with the hopes of having it out by the election. And it's really basically kind of like two projects that kind of work together in tandem. The first one is one that I call part-time profession. It's like unofficial title, which is a reference to a President Dwight D. Eisenhower quote. So yeah, in that one in particular, it's really built around the concept of citizen democracy and citizen assemblies in particular, or other forms of direct democracy. Um, it really is kind of plays on some historical practices involving um, citizen assemblies that have happened, like, for example, in Ireland or in Canada, where groups of people have gotten together in order to handle specific issues. Um, Organized by the government. Basically, government gets together, gets regular citizens, brings them together, educates them on a particular issue, and then they kind of work together to solve a problem. So in some ways, you could think of this as like the legal version of a jury, um, a jury of your peers, right? That kind of a thing. That's the same basic idea and concept. Um, and it's also in part inspired by the actual based on the actual way that Athens did its democracy, in that for a majority of the history of democracy in Athens, it was not what we kind of envision as being a direct democracy where everybody votes on everything and when people who are voted into positions, but rather instead a majority of like how you pick people for positions was based off of lottery. So it's like a I can never remember exactly how to pronounce this word, but it's like a steristocracy, or some people today would call that a lotistocracy, right? In that the people who are appointed into certain specific positions, in particular, were not elected by their peers. You had individuals' names who were just pulled out, and you served if your name was pulled out, and that was it. You didn't really have a choice. You couldn't really say no unless you had some really weird circumstances going on. It was kind of a combination of those two things, and that the players essentially are operating as people who have been picked randomly to operate in this citizen assembly. So the players would kind of work together to figure out, okay, like what kinds of issues are we going to be handling in this game? So that was the one half of it, and then the other half of it was a game called the Political Animal, in which case you and the other players in the game essentially are operating as are political operatives of various types and stripes, working together essentially as different parts of a government trying to solve problems. And so some of you might be uh, civil servants, running a department or being the head of a certain section. So you're a bureaucrat essentially of one of kind of another, whether you're military or not. That obviously depends. You could be a security person, so again, military or secret service or intelligence or whatever. You could be a staffer. And obviously in that case, we're starting to look at more like the kinds of people who you would have seen on the TV show The West Wing. Um, or you could be an actual politician, in which case you're like the face of the campaign. Yeah, as much as people might think or say, politics is obviously it really is a team sport. And it's just that, just kind of like a band, right? The the face of the band gets all of the attention and gets a lot of the credit, and other members of the band sometimes, unfortunately, don't. Some of them get seen sometimes, and other ones like almost completely ignored, unfortunately, unless you're like a mega fan of that group or whatever. Um, Same is obviously the true is obviously true in politics, so right? In many ways, it's actually quite similar. I think when it comes to team building, for like even if you're doing like a fantasy D&D campaign or something like that, and that you're going to have your muscle, you're going to have your face, you're going to have your people who specialize in certain things, you're going to have your fixers, who are essentially like your rogue types. Um, who potentially sneak out information that most people want to keep secret, or are really good investigators and things like that, or who just really good at getting you the things that you need in order to solve problems. I think for me, the reason why those ambitious projects is just because I would find them so hard to write because of needing to essentially limit myself and not create essentially like a giant diatribe, or something like that, or end up creating something that's just not interesting for your average person, and also because I want them to be educational tools. So real quick, I'll just explain what it is I'm doing here before we move on to the next question. Basically, what I'm doing here is I'm starting to sew my next text block. So this is the end page. I'm running a line of thread back and forth on this so I can attach it to the next set of the actual beginning first signature of the text block. So yeah, and just to let you know, the text block that I'm currently sewing right now is Rosewood Abbey. This is a game by Callum, where the players are essentially monastics at a special monastery where they learn a lot about math and science and stuff like that, and other mysteries of the universe. Natural philosophers are quite common amongst this particular group of monastics, and they have a tendency. One of the oaths I believe that they take, if I remember correctly, is that they kind of have to tell the truth essentially all the time, or at least seek out the truth. Um, and so, as a result of that, a lot of the gameplay is about you all trying to discover the truth, and so you're trying to solve mysteries and things like that. So this is inspired heavily by a book and series that was then adapted by the BBC. I think it was the BBC. I don't remember the name of the series off the top of my head, unfortunately, but yeah, it's essentially a book and movie series where the again, it's a mystery. It's a series of mystery stories where the monk, who's like the main character of the story, ends up solving lots of mysteries and stuff like that. Um, so yeah, I'm going to go ahead and keep working on this while we move on to our next question. This one came from John Boyle, friend of the channel, who currently is running a Kickstarter. Link will be found down below for Trash to Treasures, which is their a new Goblin Magical Girl game, if I remember correctly. Um, yeah, it's a very interesting approach to that particular genre. But in any case, what John's question was so looking through John's when John looks through their published games and old works in progress, they usually find things that they want to revisit or things that they are still very satisfied with. So basically, John's asking if I have a game I'd like to revisit for like a second edition or supplemental content or something like that. Or on the flip side, is there a game that I feel really stuck the landing and doesn't really need like it's is stands good and true on its own as is? I think the game that I have that kind of landed the best, actually, believe it or not, was my very first one. So yeah, my first game was a solo game using the Carta system. That was, Cat McDonald's Carta system, and it was part of a jam for that system. And the basic idea behind the game was that you're actually playing a cartographer, which of course is amusing because it's a card game where you use the cards in the deck to create a map, and so you're literally exploring the map and making a map at the same time. But anyway, it was inspired by an actual historical cartographer from Korea, uh, Kim Jong-ho, who was relatively famous for creating probably one of the highest quality early modern maps of Joseon period Korea. Yeah, so basically you are Gosamja, which was his pen name, kind of exploring around. Not literally Gosamja, but you can be whoever you want to be. But the basic idea is that you are an early modern cartographer who's kind of going around your country, and you're pulling cards, and the cards are describing certain scenes and things that you discover, and you're potentially adding or subtracting stuff that you need to collect to properly map things out. Basically, data points, right? You're collecting data points for your map. So as you go around, you have limited supplies, which kind of mark out the limited amount of time and stuff you have to explore before, let's say, winter comes, or you run out of money and you got to stop for a while, and stuff like that. So, and you have different types of sponsors that you could potentially have. So maybe you're being sponsored by merchants or the government or whatever. Um, so yeah, that the basic idea there is just that, like, you're doing all this whole process. And yeah, I think that's the game that probably landed the best, and I have felt the best about, and I feel doesn't really need. If it needs a second edition, it's not because of the game itself. I don't. I think the writing in it is good, and I really appreciate the start that Cat's Carta system Carta SRD gave us when it came to like starting to set it up and things. I think it really went well. Um, the only thing I would say is that if it needs a revision, it would be just for like making it pretty and maybe slightly more accessible. When I originally created it, I put it in landscape font in large type with the idea that, okay, someone could print this out, big pages, front, back, front, back, front, back, or two pages like this, where, one page one's here, page two's here, and then you kind of punch the side and you flip it over and there's 4, 3, 4, 5, 6, so on. But it's like black and white. It's like, a dark gray black on a white background. It's not super. That's the most interesting thing to look at. There's literally one piece of art in the entire thing that I made myself. Um, that's just like essentially a black and white shaded illustration, pencil illustration. Um, and that's it. um, so yeah, I think it could use some art. I didn't necessarily when I originally was creating it though. I didn't want to like throw tons of art and stuff in there because I mean I know I had a lot of illustrations and things that I could have used. Historical stuff, free, public publicly accessible, you know, uh, art that I could have used and kind of put in there. But I didn't want to, even though it's obviously based off of South Korean history or Korean history in general, I didn't want to. I wanted to make it so that people could use the world could be like whatever you wanted instead of forcing it to be Korea, especially since a lot of people aren't necessarily all that familiar with early modern Korean history. Um, so yeah, I wanted to kind of make it in a way so that the country could be your country, whatever, whether it's a real thing, fictional thing, whatever. Um, so yeah, that was the basic idea behind that, and I think it stuck the landing well. So that's why it's not doesn't really have any art or anything in it because I wanted you to fill in the art. Because you're exploring the world, you're filling it out with visions of whatever it is that you're seeing in the world and stuff like that. Finally, to kind of really actually get back to the original intention of the question of do you have a game that you'd like to revisit with a second edition or supplemental content and so forth, I'm kind of already doing that to a certain extent with one of my games that's um, Project Hypaethros, which is sort of like a time travel game that I have. In that I'm actually kind of going back and starting to create an actual play based on it, which I've already have like the beginnings of, and I'm creating some systems to kind of go along with that. That I'm probably going to release separately, with the idea that you could use it with Project Hypaethros, but it's not like built in. Um, and yeah, and then also there's two games that I have technically released as like early access sort of stuff that have never been finished that I would need to go back and finish, and that is Gelsist, which is kind of like my take on Pendragon, but removing the knighthood, and the Predatory States, which was the game that I made based on, inspired greatly by like the Operation Condor, and the citizens attempting to resist like the right wing sort of junta takeover that was happening in a lot of countries, um, in South America as a result of American meddling and stuff like that. During the Cold War and such. So yeah, that's another thing. That's a game that I do need to go back and actually finish. I mean, it is in a state. Both of them are in states where you could play them, but for Gelsist, like there's a whole setting and stuff that's supposed to be in that in order to really for it to work, and that has not been introduced yet. And then for Predatory States, I really need to kind of tool around with the system to actually make it work better. It's kind of clunky right now and doesn't really feel right. It doesn't work the way I'd originally intended. So I need to do some work on that one. So moving on to the last question that was asked today, we have a question from Emily, otherwise known on the internet as Odds and Ints, and she asked, creatively, is there any instincts that you often are fighting with? So things that you feel would go wild if unchecked or lead you too far away from what your goals often are. So I think in some ways I kind of have two answers for this question. The first one would be just the fact of the way that I kind of come up with ideas for games is I'm very much a struck by inspiration, gotta hit it while the iron's still hot sort of creator. So as a result, quite often I'll have a good idea and it's just not the right time, whether it's life or I already have six other things I'm trying to do. And that just like makes it really complicated, obviously, to try and put something together. Especially if I'm trying to do something for a jam or something like that. Jams oftentimes are the ways that I have managed to successfully create games, just because they're ways that I can kind of force myself to limit myself to a certain thing. The second thing that also limiting myself when it comes to time also helps with is another thing that I found that I'm not the best at is, or not the best at handling, is I guess the sort of classic feature creep. Obviously I've covered all these things and all these systems and stuff, and there's lots of other things I'd like to explore, either settings or games or mechanics specific things and stuff that I end up trying to put too much. Whether it's too much lore, too much setting, too much mechanic, just too much, and then it ends up becoming a mess that I then have to chop away at to try to find the good wood in the tree. Um, yeah. So yeah, I think that would be my answer for that question. Is just that sometimes I try to do too much, and that obviously becomes a problem. And other times is I've got too many ideas floating around in my head, and they keep interfering and running into each other, um, which unfortunately causes creation paralysis, kind of similar to like decision paralysis. It's just there's too much stuff going on in your head all at once, and so you can't really concentrate on one thing at a time. So yay, neurodiversity. Anyway, um, so yeah, that is the questions that we had for today. So thank you all for joining me on this little sort of Q&A session as I start working on the binding of Rosewood Abbey. Links will be found down below to the uh, links will be found down below to Callum's game, Rosewood Abbey, that I'm binding right now. They're supposed to be ordering new physical copies for their game right now. If you'd rather have like a physical book done by a proper printer, not by me, obviously. um, so you can find that there. If you are interested in potentially purchasing a copy of one of my games that I have bound myself, I actually have a couple copies on Etsy. Again, I'll be putting a link down below for the Tutelary Society, which I guess actually is another game that I think landed quite well. Although could use some, maybe not necessarily revision, but promotion. So I guess I'll do that right now. Yeah, that game can be found. I have 3 copies on Etsy right now. They're bound in a very similar way to this one right here, where they're punched on the side and stuff. So they don't necessarily lay flat, but it's much thinner than this, so it's easier to kind of keep it open. And I managed to find a better paper to print them out on and stuff than what you have here on this one. But yeah, anyway, yeah, the links for that will be found down below. Uh, Jonathan Boyle's, and Bree Danan's campaign for Trash to Treasure will also be found in the doobly-doo down below. So go ahead and check that out as well. And yeah, I'll go ahead and link any sort of channels or anything else that I can find from the people who asked these kind questions for us today. And thank you. Have a good zone. And don't forget to rate your itch purchases.